Hello. So in today's video, we're going to be building this modal. I've used this pattern on almost a dozen different commercial websites. It's working for some well-known brands. Unfortunately, I'm under NDA and contractual agreement that I can't mention these brands, but you would have heard of them. And typically, these projects all need some form of a modal, whether it's a dialog pop-up like this or a side menu. Kind of typically this might be used on a mobile. I'm going to build this from scratch with you, but if you want to just skip to the end result, you can jump to the end of the video, and the code is also in my GitHub repo. But if you do use it, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you're feeling really generous, a comment would mean a lot to me. All right, cool. Let's dive into the code. I've created a modal.tsx. Oh, that's just happened. I've created a modal.tsx file. Hopefully that's big enough now. And we're going to be using React transition group. So I'm going to import transition from there, and I'll share with you the documentation. But basically, this handles the entering and exit states of the component, or the children within it. And it moves through these states and entering, entered, exiting, exited, and we can do what we want throughout each of those states. The timeout is the duration in which you have to animate it. So it's how long before it's fully entered and how long before it's unmounted. Obviously, here it's been specified that it's mounting and unmounting. We're going to need to set up some props. So it's showing Boolean and on close. And pass is showing to the in prop. What I'm going to do is create a fixed full size container with a high Z index. And I'm going to put something inside it just for testing. It's a width. Now back in the home page, we're going to need some sort of state. Modal showing. This is set to be a client page so that it can use state. Probably wouldn't do that in a site that had data fetching needs. You'd typically fetch the data up here and then put the client components down a level. Okay. Okay, nothing's there. Background on this. started it. Tell me if I opened it. Okay, so that's appeared, and there's currently no way of closing it. What I'd normally do here is actually insert a backdrop, which can become an interactive element, and that would be positioned absolute behind everything else with some sort of opacity, and in the design, got a backdrop blur as well. Then I'd make the main content relative so it sits over the top, take the background off of the container. Yeah. But now we'll just dismiss it when we actually click on the modal. You notice that there's a slight delay before it's unmounted, and that's this duration here, this timeout duration. So if I put it to 1 second, it takes a second to unmount. You can actually also specify enter and exit durations. Typically, we'd want to exit a modal very quickly so that the user can get back to what they were looking at before. I think now we've basically got the transition set up. I'd like to be able to click on the backdrop. So actually, I'll take that off and indicate to the user that that is interactive. Okay, let's center the content. Okay, we'll then put a shadow on this and a border. Yep, it's looking a bit better. Rounded slightly. Okay, and some padding. White so we can see it. Okay, cool. So that's the structure without any animation. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know that I'm a fan of using GSAP, primarily because of its flexibility and the timeline. I just really love it. What we create is an onEnter and an onExit function. These will be attached to the transition. There are other callbacks you can use here, such as onExiting and onExited. So onExited could be useful if you want to update some state, or just know when this has fully exited. So that will be called after 300 milliseconds. Now, I want to be able to fade in the backdrop and scale fade in modal content. So I need to put an identifier on this so that it can be queried. Because what we'll be doing is we'll be doing usap.to and then something capacity 1. We could put an ID on this as backdrop. And if you know that there's only going to be one instance of the modal ever showing, this would be fine. But if you have, say, a modal that can open another modal over the top because you need an extra confirmation step, we wouldn't want to use an ID here, because you can only have one element, or you should only have one element in the DOM with that ID. So we can put a class name on it. Just, let's say backdrop and content. And then we can fade that in. We'd want to start it hidden. So now, as you can see, that's fading in. I'll do the same for the content. Although in this case, I'm actually going to use a from to between, which gives us the ability to set the initial styles. So we'll set it to opacity 0 and scale 0.9, and we'll then bring it to opacity 1 and scale 1. Speed up this a bit. Sometimes it's nice to add an ease. That looks quite nice. The modal comes in quickly, and then the background sort of fades out slightly slower behind it. GSAP, or use GSAP, as a context-safe wrapper, and what this allows you to do is basically ensure that any of these animations are cleaned up when, say, this component unmounts. It also allows you to define scope. So if we see here, got an example without the context safe or without scope, and then they've got version here. Scope is basically the container, so we'll create a ref for that. There's a div, and we'll put it here. And what this means is that when I put context safe around the onEnter callback, it will scope these query selections .backdrop and .content to just this container. So if we do have multiple modals stacked, they won't be affecting each other. These animations won't be querying a backdrop from elsewhere. So this is really best practice when using GSAP with React. And if we check the transition docs, there is a nodeRef prop, optional but recommended. When we have a node on the outer element, we can attach it. When we have a ref on it, we can attach it to the nodeRef, like so. And I'd expect all of this to just be working as it was before. Yeah. Okay, so what if we wanted to animate in some of the content? Revisit the design. So what we've got here are some children, and it would be nice if they faded in. Need to keep this quite subtle and quick. So we can basically just target the H2 and the P tag, really. And if we wanted to, we could add a slight Y offset, just something small. Can't actually see that happening because the animation, these are all running synchronously, so they'll start at the same time. What we do here is typically change this to a timeline. And the timeline allows you to sequence these tweens. And now if we revisit it, we get backdrop, modal content, backdrop, modal content, which is fine, but it's too much time for the user to wait. So we can specify on this, the actual container of the content, for it to come in at the same time, 0 seconds, and then we can bring the content in afterwards. We can actually find that a little bit more as well, because it's still a bit slow. It would also be nice if it was staggered. So if we put a slight stagger on it, and we can then say, so plus equals 1 adds between 1 second after the end of the timeline. So minus equal 0.2 will mean that 0.1 will mean that it starts this 0.1 before this is finished. It doesn't seem to have done that. The stagger's too quick for what we've got there, but all right, I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Don't spend ages on it. The content here could have to do with a bit of spacing though. I'll just make the heading bigger. Okay, so that's pretty much what we have in the design, apart from the close icon, which I will add, but at a later date. So that's got it coming in, but we don't have it exiting. So let's just write the code for that. We need to ensure that the exit animation durations don't exceed the time here, because it will be unmounted after 300 milliseconds. So if this is 1 second, it will only get 30% the way through its fade. And I can demo that here. So if you look at the blur, it sort of is jumping, hasn't had time to finish. So we need to make sure that this is less time than the exit duration, exit timeout. We can scale this down really quickly. And that's working quite nicely. And remember to wrap that in the context safe. The other thing which I forgot to do is to register the GSAP plugin, use GSAP. Okay, so yeah, pretty happy with that. This can be updated to pass through children if you want to put some dynamic content in here. And you can also get the transition status, or the transition state from in here, if you want, and then pass that into your children. So quite often, transition status, by the way, is just these. So you might have a component in here, and that component might need to handle its own, might make sense for it to handle its own transitions. So yeah, in that case, I'd cut that out, create a modal content component with the transition status on it here, and then handle its own animations. And that way, the same kind of modal wrapper can be used for lots of different content on, children content in here. Okay, so let's just duplicate this and create the side menu. It's pretty much going to be the same thing, except we'll have height full, and we'll set it to the right 0. So it's scaling in from the middle, which is weird, and it's not actually been positioned correctly, which I believe is due to its position here. We won't want it rounded. Probably just want the border on the left. See how that looks. All right, then I just want to change how the content comes in. Could do an X% starting at 100, coming to 0, and that will move it in from the side. Completely messed that up. Yeah, and that works nicely. Start days exit. All right, cool. So yeah, as you can see, using the React transition group with its onEnter and onExit functions can then animate the content, the backdrop, the content, and anything exactly how we want using GSAP. Timeline's really flexible. With the mount and unmount, these elements are removed from the DOM. Yeah, there we have it. Modal and side menu. Cool. If you made it this far, yeah, appreciate thumbs up, and any questions, let me know. The code is in the Pragmattic Tutorials GitHub, which can be found in the description. Have a good day. Bye.